It's cruising season and you're either out sailing or you're shopping for a new boat. And if it's the latter, I've got a few things you might want to know. Good morning, you lucky people. It is 4 o'clock in the morning and I'm here at the shop finishing up random projects because I can't sleep. So you guys actually caught me in kind of a weird time where I've caught up on the projects here at the shop. So the engine rebuilds are all done. I officially have a small handful of days where the shop pretty much has nothing to do, and it's actually kind of strange because I haven't had nothing to do at the shop for quite some time. So everybody's out cruising right now, and that's why is once you kind of get all of your customers taken care of and people aren't freaking out anymore, they're out enjoying themselves, then I'm kind of here working on the background projects while you guys are out sailing. And sure enough, the projects come to an end and I'm like, okay, I get a break now. So I do actually try to get out and go cruising. I just wait until September when everybody is pretty much back home and everybody's kids are back home. And so that's why you guys haven't seen me out on the water. Those of you local to me here in Washington, I will probably get out on the water. Usually I try to leave in September sometime. And that's kind of my annual reset for the year because sure enough, like clockwork, right when you think it's like slowing down, it doesn't actually ever slow down. Like right now, yes, I have like 1 day of freedom where I'm like, wow, there's not that much to do around here. But in reality, there's always things to do. And I actually picked up a little bit of work for tomorrow, which is good. Or later today, because it's early. And so, I'm not busy, but, like the big projects that I kind of had in the shop for several months are officially taken care of. And that's awesome. So I have actually been doing a couple random things. I've been painting. My dad gave me a really cool misery whip, an old 2-person saw, and I've been painting that. And then I also actually have a piece of plywood that I've painted white, and I'm going to paint that as my shop sign. And so once I'm done with the saw, I'll show you guys the saw here in a sec. Don't laugh, I'm not Bob Ross, okay? But once I'm kind of done with that, then I'm going to get this white sign painted so I can actually hang it above my door so people can actually find my shop. Because right now my shop has like no labels or anything. If you pulled into the parking lot, you'd have no idea where Madame Diesel actually was. So, which isn't critical. I don't have a storefront, and so it's not a huge deal. However, it'd be nice to have a sign. Just saying. All right, guys, back to the engines. So you're looking for a new boat and you found the dream boat that you've always wanted, and you're getting ready to meet up with the broker, do the sea trial, hire a surveyor, that sort of thing. And the one thing you really want to check is the engines, the electrical, some of the systems on board. And these are all things that a standard hull surveyor most likely is not going to touch. So I want to talk about this today because this is well worth the money, especially once you start getting into the bigger boats with the bigger engines, stuff like that. This particular engine obviously isn't huge. However, if we're talking a rebuild, we're talking 20 grand plus. So we're talking real money for, any marine engine nowadays. The prices of things have just gone through the roof. So even if you're buying, a Catalina 27, if it's going to be your long-term boat, a mechanical survey is going to be able to tell you what you're getting into. And that's where it pays off. Even though I'm a marine diesel mechanic, I still wanted to have a survey to kind of help me create a checklist of what would need to be done, and like whether it was stuff I wanted to deal with. So even I hire a surveyor, even though I do the surveying, because I have to remember I'm the one who's all excited about the boat, and I'm most likely to skip over probably some pretty critical things because I think this is the boat for me and maybe it's not. So the reality of what you're buying can be checked, and this is a step worth taking, especially if you guys are newer to boat purchasing. There's a lot of kind of misconceptions and things that I've picked up that like previous owners and brokers and stuff like that will hide in order to make a sale happen. So it can be somewhat expensive up front to hire any sort of surveyor to haul the boat out, that sort of thing. However, like when you're thinking the average survey, I think, and don't quote me on this because prices always change, but the average survey I know about is around $1,500. And I'd rather spend $1,500 to know that my power boat has decent engines and I can go ahead with the purchase versus save the $1,500 and then spend 20 grand doing 2 turbos and maybe a heat exchanger or something in 6 months time. All right, before we get started, let's go over a couple common misconceptions. Number 1, your hull surveyor will check your engine and everything will be fine. That is false. Most hull surveyors know very little, if anything, about diesel engines or gasoline engines for that matter, and they will not deep dive into like the performance or the health of this thing. They're strictly going to check, does it run, does it move the boat, are the through holes okay, and maybe glance at a couple hoses and some other things. Now, of course, there are outliers. I certainly have a couple friends who are hull surveyors and actual mechanical surveyors, and they know, they have a history of being a mechanic, and they know exactly what they're looking at. So if you can find one of those, excellent. But a regular hull surveyor is not going to know enough about your engine or the electrical or some of the other systems on board the boat to be able to give you like an in-depth view of what you're facing if you buy the boat. So if you want to know for sure what you're dealing with, you need to hire that specialist. That goes for other systems as well. If you're buying a sailboat, you can buy a rigging surveyor. You can hire a rigging surveyor and have him actually climb the mast, inspect the rigging, whereas the hull surveyor usually is going to stay on deck and give you a very generic, like explanation. Okay, you've got some crevice corrosion or something like that. Same thing with the engine. It's all very generic, and that's actually one of the biggest complaints I hear when I come to do an inspection after the purchase of the boat. They're like, Meredith, you found all this stuff. Our surveyor didn't find anything. And I'm like, well, the surveyor doesn't know anything about engines, so of course they're not going to find anything. So if you want to know anything about your engine, you need to hire somebody who knows marine engines. Misconception number 2. Any old mechanic can inspect this thing. It's just a diesel. False. No, it's a marine diesel, and it has a lot of specific quirks about it. You really want to find somebody who specializes in marine diesel engines, because I worked on regular diesels for many years, and the first time I saw a Yanmar, I learned a lot. Didn't know anything about the quirks that these engines have. And yes, even though I was a marine engineer, the smaller sailboat type engines, they're very, very different than like the modern semi-trucking engines that I was currently working on at the time. So you really, really want to find somebody who specializes in marine diesel and who is a legitimate diesel mechanic, who like went to school for it. Not some boatyard kid, not some, neighbor friend who knows how an engine works. They're not going to be able to tell you anything really helpful in terms of like how to maintain this thing, how to keep it happy, how to find what's actively wrong with it before you even buy the boat, the ABYC standards around what might be wrong or how things are set up. Things like that, you really want somebody who not only understands the standards, but can like walk you through like, okay, this engine has or hasn't been touched in many years. Here's what you're going to need to do. Here's the generals of what it's going to cost. Now, the third misconception, this is where it's going to lead me, is the third misconception is if the engine's in bad shape, you know, the buyer might walk. Well, that's obviously very true, right? Not everyone wants to deal with a rebuilt engine. However, another thing about hiring a marine like diesel mechanic or a marine engineer is sometimes you're buying the boat and you already know the engine is shot. And you just want to be able to sit down with somebody and say, what is it going to take to get this engine out? What is it going to take to rebuild it? Can we even get parts for it? That's a big one that I talk a lot of people through. When I'm surveying a lot of boats, if it has an engine like an old marinized, you know, like VW engine or something that you can't get certain parts for, well, you know, you may be capable of rebuilding the engine itself. And yes, the engine parts themselves are available. However, all the marinized parts like the manifolds and the raw water pumps and things like that might not be. And that might be the hassle that you don't want to deal with. So what exactly is a mechanical survey? Well, it is what it sounds like it is, where you're hiring a mechanic or, you know, whatever diesel specialist, marine engineer to come in and inspect the engine essentially as is. They're going to be doing a non-invasive inspection. So we're not here to be pulling injectors and doing compression tests. And the reason for that, and the reason why most surveyors won't get into like an engine or even start undoing panels on a boat, is the owner of the boat could come back and say, hey, you broke it, it doesn't run right, you're now responsible. So when I'm on board, I'm limited to very, very basic inspections or non-invasive testing. Things like oil sampling, blow-by testing, using my temp gun, you know, general visual inspection, things like that, where, you know, if I did somehow manage to screw up something like an air cleaner, okay, I'll buy you an air cleaner. But, you know, if you want to go more in depth on something like that, the owner not only has to be on board, but they really have to be the one that hires me to do that work. An important thing to remember is if you are the potential buyer or the person hiring, say, me to come in and do your inspection, you own that survey and you can sell it afterwards. So I answer to you and to you only. I don't answer to the broker. I don't answer to the owner. That being said, because I'm a young lady and, you know, owners tend to get really offended when you start finding things, I've had a lot of brokers and owners freak out thinking I'm going to screw up the sale. And that's not what I'm here to do. What I'm here to do is find out as much information about this engine as physically possible. So I'll be testing things like the electrical, I'll be testing, you know, blow-by, I'll be checking stringers, you know, all kinds of stuff to try to get an idea of, you know, like what you're getting into when you purchase the boat. There have been times where I've actually had to kick a broker off the boat or the owner off the boat because they keep interrupting me or they try to embarrass me in front of everybody. And, well, I would be very surprised if they ever did it to a man. They certainly do it to me, and it gets old real quick. The gear I bring, I'm going to show you what I bring here, and this is just some of it, but this is my general survey bag. And I always bring either a temp gun or my thermal imaging camera. The FLIR you can get, I think I like ordered it through Granger or something, and it's not that expensive. You're always going to want some sort of multimeter and an amp clamp of sorts. This is a leakage meter, so this is what I use to test like shore power cords for AC leakage into the water. My amp clamp here is actually missing. I always bring a couple hammers, mostly for tapping stringers to make sure there's no rot. Got to have a flashlight, of course. A moisture meter is a good thing. If I'm tapping and I find a dull spot, I do want to have a moisture meter to confirm whether there's moisture present or not. And then this stuff is oil sample stuff. So the brake clean, the scissors, that tubing in my hand, a couple rags, and then I always bring all the oil samplers because I actually had one fail during a survey once. So I just bring all of them just in case one decides to play games. And then a GFCI tester to plug in and a screwdriver if I need it. Periodically I do, but most of the time I don't, but I want to be prepared. For more in-depth stuff, like if I'm at like a facility or on a bigger ship, sometimes I need like an inspection camera to actually look up inside things. Typically on a sailboat engine, you don't really need it, but on like the dam, yes, you do. Non-invasive means essentially we're not getting into the engine. So very, very basic things like the air cleaner. You know, I'm not afraid to take an air cleaner off and look at it. Mostly because I want to make sure the foam is actually still there. But we're not going to be removing things like the exhaust elbow or anything like that. I'm going to, of course, check all the fluids. And I always, pull my oil dipstick out twice because the boat rocks. And this is brand new oil, obviously, because it's a brand new rebuilt engine. But I'll put it on my finger and actually use my headlamp and kind of spread it around like so. And there have been plenty of times where I can actually really clearly see like glitter from metal in the oil. And so that will give me an indication right away if we've got excessive wear and tear. Things like belts, that's kind of a given. It's an easy thing to replace, but belts are a really good indicator of whether a previous owner is actually maintaining stuff. That also goes for things like hoses, water pumps, raw water pumps. If those things are like leaking or they're painted from the factory, then the owner never, maintained even the most basic of things. A raw water pump that's leaking like this one definitely needs to be replaced. And on this particular unit, if it's a Cummins and a powerboat, that's not a cheap job. One thing I use to assess how deep an owner has kind of gotten into the engine is I look for bolts with broken paint. So like, see how this bolt doesn't have like just paint all over everything, like it's not untouched, it's clearly been opened. I want to see that they've cleaned out or serviced the heat exchanger. Obviously I'd prefer paperwork, pictures, anything like that, but I'm gonna look around the engine and it's okay to see some corrosion as long as it's not excessive, and then really assess like what have they serviced and what have they not. Dead giveaways for engines that haven't been serviced are like the factory coolant hoses with the factory paint on them. When I see a 30-year-old Yanmar with gray hoses on it, those are original. And, if they've never bothered to change the hoses, which should be done about every 10 or so years, then have they bothered to change the coolant or check the heat exchanger? What does the inside of the actual engine block look like? Those things become kind of red flags for me, and I'm concerned about the engine overall. When you're inspecting these engines, I kind of want you to be critically thinking like a doctor would, right? I want you to try to glean as much history about them, what the owners have done to them, what's been maintained, what hasn't. It's more than just seeing if the engine runs and moves the boat. So this engine has 8,000 hours. It was extremely well maintained. It's a training engine because they did eventually just want a newer engine. And, this one also is a training engine, but it only has 400 hours and it is significantly newer. And this one was never maintained, short of like changing the oil. I think that's literally all he did. I did replace the hoses probably 6 months before it got pulled, but the coolant was so salty, it not only broke the water pump, but it corroded the whole front gear housing, the water pump, the thermostat housing, all kinds of stuff. And it became a very expensive project that he was just like, you know what? I want a new engine. So expensive, expensive just for not doing the most simple maintenance. It's actually a lot of these small things that add up over time that really lead to a major refit or repower. And so if you don't maintain coolant, you're going to have salty coolant and you're going to corrode the inside of your block. So these are the cooling passages on like a Cummins. And obviously you can't see this from the outside, but this is like what I'm thinking about when I see really rusty or salty coolant in an engine. Because eventually your engine's going to corrode like this Perkins, and it doesn't matter how well this thing runs, it's going to overheat no matter what. So obviously we can't go over everything in the 20 some minutes I have with you guys today, but I wanted to like kind of get you thinking along the lines of, you know, like what I'm looking for when I come in to inspect an engine. Really what a survey is a formal write-up of like my findings. Sometimes I'll sit down with the customer like after the fact, you know, without anyone around, and we'll just have a conversation about what we both found, what I found, what it might take to fix it or, you know, deal with it, and, you know, whether they're going to move forward or not. I don't care if you buy the boat, right? I'm just the mechanic. And so, you know, the boat buying process is not what I would call a fun one, at least for me. And I think a big part of that is when I start finding things and there's like a bad broker on board or a bad owner on board, they always come down on me like, oh, you're a girl, you don't have any experience, blah, blah, blah. It's hilarious like how deep they go with their accusations of, you don't know what you're talking about, you know, and they're hilarious accusations. I actually had a broker tell me I did not know what I was talking about when we found a broken strut underneath a boat while it hung in the straps. That's how like crazy I'm talking. And I'm pretty sure they don't do that to men. So guys, you know, male surveyors out there, if it happens to you, I'm sorry, but man, it really happens to us females. And it gets old real quick. So, you know, be very careful, especially if you're a new boat buyer. If you have a friend or somebody knowledgeable that you trust to come with you at least while the surveyors are doing stuff, while the boat's being sea trialed, that can always be helpful. And then, you know, like really sitting down with the people you hired and having a deep conversation with them, or asking them to check certain things, you know, can really answer a lot of questions for you. So typically what I'll do is, you know, like we'll sit down and we'll talk about exactly what I find, or we'll talk about it over the phone after the fact. And, you know, if I end up doing a write-up, which, you know, the write-up can help with like negotiations. Sometimes I do surveys for like insurance claims where, you know, there was an issue in the engine compartment or the engine room and they need a mechanical survey to, you know, determine like what happened and caused the fire or whatever. You know, like that's like you can use that for negotiation. You own that write-up. So when I hand you that piece of paper with my findings, you now own it. And if another potential buyer wants to buy it, you can sell it to them. It's yours, you know, so that's what you're paying for when you pay for like a formal survey. If you're paying for just like a general inspection, which some people do, is they'll choose to hire me or hire a mechanic like hourly, and they'll be the ones with the notebook. And we'll still be testing and checking the same things, but sometimes it can be cheaper to just like the two of us one-on-one, let's go through the boat together, and you're going to write down kind of things that need to be done, things that we see that sort of thing. And so some people prefer that, so they're involved and they just know, instead of reading through like a packet of findings after the fact and not really understanding, like what they mean. That can also, be helpful. So it's kind of personal preference. Whole surveying is different. Whole surveying, like is also just as important. And certain hull surveyors can do mechanical inspections. They were former mechanics. I have a friend who's a very well-known surveyor, and she was a mechanic. She's an expert. So, I would absolutely not question her mechanical survey at all. I've also seen surveys from other mechanics that I absolutely question. So when there's comments of, oh, the engine's smoking a ton and that's normal because it's a diesel. I've literally seen that like quoted in a survey once, and it was certainly not normal. And so, you do really want to try to get as much information as you can, and that's what I'm getting at. And so that way you can make the most informed decision possible, because most boats are not cheap. But even if you're going with a small boat, that's like less than 10 grand, that doesn't mean you can't have a survey. You can certainly have a survey. So, don't be afraid to hire somebody to just make sure the boat is safe. Here in Puget Sound, where half the time there's wind and half the time there's not, our engines, our little iron Genoas, have to be able to get us home. So this really is a safety device to me. Like when me and Puppy Dog are sailing, I need to know that my engine is well maintained and running perfectly before I ever consider going to the San Juans or out the straits or anything like that. I need to know that I can get home, because I single hand. Oakum's life is in my hands. It's all my decisions, and I don't want to, kill her as a result of poor decision making. So that's where I really, really push good maintenance and, like taking care of your engine. Like, yes, you might be on a sailboat, but even a power boat, don't be okay with subpar. I know things are expensive. If you have to, set yourself up and save the money and do it correctly, and do it on time if you can. And if you can't, then don't take the boat out. Don't force the boat to take you places when it really needs to be fixed or serviced, because that's when you start getting into, catastrophic damage that may or may not be able to be fixed. And that's when people get, really upset, or they lose the boat, or, they go bankrupt trying to fix things, and it's not good. So, take it with a grain of salt, but it's well worth going through this stuff. And if you need help, don't be afraid to hire somebody.